Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo, y Calderon, was born on July 6, 1907 in Coyoacán, Mexico. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, had immigrated from Germany in 1891. Her mother, Matilde Calderon y González, came from a family rooted in both indigenous American and Spanish ancestry. Frida was born in La Casa Azul, the Blue House, which her father had built for the family in 1904. Its bright blue exterior gave the house its name, and that home would become a constant presence throughout her life, from childhood to her final days. After settling in Mexico, Guillermo tried several kinds of work. Once he married Matilde, she encouraged him to take up photography, the same profession as her own father. The decision suited him. Guillermo Kahlo proved to be a highly skilled photographer, and soon became successful. The Mexican government commissioned him to document landscapes and historic buildings across the country. For about 4 years, he travelled widely, creating hundreds of images. Frida grew up surrounded by her father's photographs. Through them, she absorbed an early education in Mexican history, architecture, and art. At the same time, her curiosity extended well beyond the past. She was drawn to nature and science, collecting rocks, insects, plants, and small animals and bringing them home to examine. Her mother was not always pleased to find creatures in the house, but her father encouraged this curiosity, eager for his daughter to learn as much as possible. Frida was one of 4 daughters. Her older sisters were Matilda and Adriana, and her younger sister was Cristina. Among them, Frida held a special place in her father's eyes. He regarded her as the brightest of his children, and the one most like himself in temperament and spirit. When he was not working, Guillermo enjoyed painting, and he sometimes took Frida with him into the countryside. There she watched him handle brushes and colour, quietly observing the process of making images by hand. At the age of 6, Frida contracted polio, a serious disease that attacks the brain and spinal cord and can leave lasting paralysis. She survived, but her recovery was long and difficult. For nearly 9 months she remained in her room at the Blue House. For a child as energetic and inquisitive as Frida, confinement was extremely hard. Cut off from her usual activities, she relied on her imagination for companionship and created an inner world to endure the isolation. The illness permanently weakened and thinned her right leg. Her parents, however, were determined that this disability would not define her. They encouraged her to be active. Frida learned to play soccer, wrestle, and box, and she became a strong swimmer. These were pursuits rarely associated with girls in Mexico in the early 20th century, yet she persisted, pushing her body in spite of its limitations. Even with constant exercise, her leg never fully recovered. Children at school and in the neighbourhood mocked her appearance and gave her a cruel nickname in Spanish, pata de palo, or peg leg. Frida did not quietly accept their ridicule. She responded with defiance and refused to let the insult or her weakened limb dictate the course of her life. As she grew older, she chose clothing that concealed her difference. She wore trousers, long dresses, and full skirts, along with several pairs of socks and a specially made shoe. She wanted to move through the world without inviting pity, judgment, or curiosity about her injured leg. Despite long absences from school due to illness, Frida proved to be an excellent student. She earned strong grades and demonstrated a remarkable memory, able to recall what she had read after a single encounter. Languages came easily to her, and she learned to read and speak Spanish, English, and German. Her parents understood that their daughter had an exceptional mind and a genuine love of learning. Recognizing her abilities, they supported her admission to the Escuela Nacional Preparatoria, the national preparatory school in Mexico City, considered the finest high school in the country. At 15, Frida entered a student body of about 2,000 boys, alongside only 34 other girls. She was not intimidated by the imbalance. Confident in her intellect and determination, she believed she could succeed on equal terms. Life in Mexico City exposed her to new ideas and experiences. The city had recently been at the heart of the Mexican Revolution, which had raged from 1910 to 1920. The political climate, the discussions among classmates, and the lessons in the classroom all influenced her. Among her peers, she was no longer known for her childhood disability. Her fellow students came to see her as intelligent, lively, and mischievous, a young woman who seemed capable of anything. Frida pursued a broad curriculum, but she was drawn most strongly to science and mathematics. Although both her father and grandfather were photographers, she aimed for a different path. She decided she wanted to become a doctor, a bold and unconventional ambition for a young woman in Mexico at that time. The training would be long and demanding, but she was resolute and prepared to undertake it. Study did not exclude enjoyment. Frida and her friends worked hard, but they also sought amusement. She joined a close-knit student group known as the Cachuchas, named for the distinctive red caps its members wore. The group included 7 boys and 2 girls. Its leader, Alejandro Gomez Arias, became her companion and later her boyfriend. These friendships were central to Frida's school life. The Cachuchas enjoyed elaborate practical jokes and playful rebellion. Frida's fearlessness and sense of humour made her popular within the group. She did not shy away from trouble and often tested the patience of her teachers. In the aftermath of the revolution, the Mexican government turned to public art as a means of nation building. Officials commissioned artists to paint large murals on public buildings, depicting the country's history and the struggles of its people. The aim was to foster pride, a shared identity, and faith in a more just future. During Frida's time at the school, one of the artists chosen for these monumental works arrived to paint a mural there. His name was Diego Rivera, already a prominent figure in Mexican art. His presence was a source of pride for the school. Frida, however, viewed him with irreverent humour. She teased him and played pranks while he worked, showing little concern for his status. Her behaviour eventually led to serious consequences. She was expelled from the school for her antics. Frida regarded the decision as unfair and decided to challenge it. In a striking act of courage, she brought her case directly to the Minister of Public Education. Her bold appeal succeeded, and she was allowed to return. Yet even this episode did not entirely curb her high spirits. She continued to be lively, unpredictable, and unconventional. These high school years strengthened her character and reinforced her resolve. She remained committed to her dream of practicing medicine, and felt that much lay ahead of her. She could not yet know how sharply her path was about to turn. Each afternoon, after classes in Mexico City, Frida travelled home by bus to the Blue House in Coyoacán. On September 17, 1925, she and Alejandro boarded their usual bus and took seats near the back. As the vehicle slowed to make a turn, a streetcar collided violently with it. The bus was crushed. Alejandro was thrown clear and dragged beneath the streetcar. Frida, trapped inside the wreckage, suffered catastrophic injuries. A metal handrail from one of the seats pierced her body. Alejandro watched, horrified, as a passerby removed it. An ambulance arrived within minutes and rushed her to the hospital. Surgeons worked urgently. Her spine and multiple bones were broken, and her survival was uncertain. Uncertain. The severity of her condition overwhelmed her family. Most could not bear to see her in such a state. Only her sister Matilde visited consistently. Day after day, as Frida lay immobilized in a full body plaster cast, Matilda sat by her side, tried to lift her spirits, and brought moments of laughter into an otherwise painful routine. Members of the Cachuchas also came to see her, reconnecting her with memories of happier school days. Yet when the visitors left and the nights grew quiet, Frida faced the reality of how close she had come to death. The trauma of that accident would remain with her for the rest of her life. Even so, she summoned the same inner strength that had helped her through polio, and resolved that this disaster too would not fully defeat her. After a month, doctors judged her strong enough to return home. The damage to her body, however, had been profound. Her bones did not heal perfectly, and she would live with chronic pain for the rest of her life. Encased in her plaster cast, unable to sit or stand, she found herself once again confined to bed at the Blue House. The once active, mischievous student who had played sports and planned a medical career now needed a new way to occupy her mind and spirit. Frida turned to art. She asked her father to lend her his paints. Although she had never seriously thought of becoming an artist, she remembered the times she had watched him work. Her mother arranged for a carpenter to build a special easel that could rest over the bed and had a large mirror placed above her so she could see her own face. In this enforced solitude, she began to paint what she knew best. She focused on herself, her family and her friends, using her reflection and her memories as constant references. She studied her father's art books, imitated works that interested her, and slowly developed her own approach. Influenced by Mexican muralists including Diego Rivera, she began to incorporate religious imagery and elements of Mexican folk art. Through these choices, she asserted her cultural identity and her deep attachment to her country. In time, she learned to walk again, although her mobility remained limited. Over the following 2 years, she returned to the hospital for additional operations and spent long periods lying on her back. Continuing her formal education became impossible, but painting did not. Art became the means through which she endured pain, reclaimed a sense of purpose, and re-entered social life. She resumed seeing friends, attended gatherings when she could, and painted with increasing intensity. Within 2 years of the accident, Frida had completed more than 24 paintings. She rarely exhibited them or sought public recognition. These early works were primarily for herself, a private record of experience and reflection. Even at that early stage, however, her paintings displayed a distinctive style that set her apart and hinted at the powerful body of work still to come. As her strength gradually returned, Frida began to re-enter the world around her, carrying this emerging artistic voice into the next chapter of her life. Frida Kahlo entered young adulthood with a renewed sense of curiosity and resilience. She spent her days surrounded by friends, attending gatherings where conversations moved easily between politics, art, and literature. These moments of companionship helped her set aside the hardships she'd endured. It was during one of these gatherings that she crossed paths again with Diego Rivera. He did not recognize her, yet Frida immediately remembered the celebrated muralist she had once mischievously teased as a schoolgirl. In the days that followed, Frida made a bold decision. She gathered 4 of her recent paintings and sought out Rivera, hoping he could offer an honest assessment of her abilities. Although their earlier encounter had been marked by playful troublemaking, she held deep respect for his artistic judgment. When she found him working high above the ground on scaffolding, she presented her work to him. Rivera observed the paintings carefully. He believed that one of them, a self-portrait, revealed a distinctive and original voice. He encouraged her to continue painting and asked to see more of her work. Frida was 21 years old, and Rivera quickly recognized both her talent and her determination. He began spending long hours with her at the Blue House, studying her art and encouraging her growth. A close bond developed, and before long the two fell deeply in love. Despite a significant age difference, Frida's father approved of the match. He viewed Rivera as a teacher who could help his daughter develop her artistic gifts. In his eyes, the pair were as different as an elephant and a dove in size and temperament, yet they complemented one another. Rivera admired Frida's individuality. She wore traditional Mexican clothing, adorned her hair with ribbons and flowers, and carried herself with a presence that reflected the culture she cherished. Her identity permeated both her daily life and her art. In 1929, Frida and Diego were married. Some questioned her choice of an older husband, but she saw in him both an artistic mentor and a partner whose influence could help shape her creative future. Marriage, however, brought new demands. Frida painted less often as she devoted much of her time to supporting Rivera's work. His murals required long hours, and she accompanied him frequently, organizing his needs and caring for him while he painted. Although she felt frustration at her lack of time for her own art, she remained committed to helping her husband. Rivera's career was flourishing, and the couple soon received an invitation to work in the United States. In November 1930, they traveled to San Francisco. Rivera's international reputation drew them into the circles of the city's cultural elite. Yet despite the warm welcome, Frida struggled to feel at home. It was the era of the Great Depression, and while she witnessed the wealth of the city's upper class, she also encountered widespread poverty during her walks through San Francisco. The contrast weighed heavily on her. Though the couple's humour and storytelling made them popular guests, their relationship grew strained. Both were strong-willed, and disagreements became frequent. Frida longed for Mexico and felt increasingly isolated. She made few close friends during this period, but one new acquaintance left a lasting mark. Dr. Leo Ilesa, a prominent physician, became both her trusted doctor and a lifelong friend. Despite her homesickness, Frida continued to create. During this time, she painted Frida and Diego Rivera, a portrait that reflected the early years of their marriage. In it, Diego appears larger than Frida and carries a painter's palette, expressing her admiration for his artistic authority. She wears traditional attire with a dove above her, perhaps echoing her father's affectionate nickname for the pair. In 1931, the couple returned briefly to Mexico so Rivera could complete a project. They stayed once again at the Blue House, but soon Rivera planned a new home for them in San Angel. The design consisted of 2 separate buildings joined by a bridge, giving each artist a space to live and work independently. Frida enjoyed being back in Mexico, yet their travels continued. The Museum of Modern Art in New York invited Rivera to present an exhibition, and the couple returned to the United States. Once again, Frida encountered the disparity between wealth and poverty in a country deeply affected by economic hardship. She was unsettled by the contrast and increasingly aware of how far she felt from home. After the exhibition closed, the couple moved to Detroit, where the Ford Motor Company commissioned Rivera to paint a large mural. While Rivera worked, Frida turned to her own art to express her experiences abroad. In 1932, she created Self-Portrait on the borderline between Mexico and the United States, a painting that positioned her between two symbolic worlds. One side depicted ancient Mexican ruins and vibrant natural forms. The other showed towering industrial structures and pollution. Through this imagery, she conveyed her longing for Mexico and her discomfort with the industrial landscape surrounding her. A year later, she painted My Dress Hangs Here, a striking commentary on her unsettled feelings about New York City. In this work, she depicted urban hardship and disorder, yet placed only her empty dress at the centre, suggesting that while her clothing might hang in the United States, her true identity remained in Mexico. After 3 years abroad, Frida and Diego returned to their new home in Mexico. The separate wings of the house eased some of the tension that had grown between them in the United States. Frida invested her energy into painting, producing some of her most compelling works during this turbulent period. She experimented with painting on metal and wood, materials commonly used in Mexican folk art, allowing her to assert her cultural heritage through form as well as imagery. These years were marked by physical hardship. Frida underwent additional surgeries and learned she would never be able to have children. The news was devastating, adding emotional weight to the pain she already carried from her accident. Her art became an outlet for sorrow, resilience, and reflection. She continued to draw deeply from Mexican history and symbolism, embedding cultural motifs into her work. A severe argument eventually led her to leave the home in San Angel. She cut her long hair and set aside the traditional clothing she had always worn. The transformation reflected her anguish during this separation from Diego, revealing how profoundly their relationship shaped her sense of self. Yet even in personal turmoil, Frida's artistic reputation grew. Viewers were captivated by the emotional clarity and symbolic depth of her paintings. She was no longer known only as Diego Rivera's wife. She was becoming an important artist in her own right. In 1937, she created Memory, or The Heart, a work filled with powerful symbolism. In it, she depicted herself without hands, suspended above a broken heart pierced by a sword. The imagery conveyed her sense of helplessness and emotional pain. Transforming her suffering into visual form allowed her to confront experiences she could not change. Later that year, her work appeared in a group exhibition at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Among those in attendance was Julian Levy, a gallery owner from New York. Struck by the originality of her paintings, he contacted Frida after returning home and invited her to exhibit her work at his gallery. It was the opportunity she had been hoping for. She accepted and began preparing new pieces, marking the beginning of an extraordinary new phase in her artistic career. Over the months that followed, she worked with growing focus and determination, shaping a body of art that would soon carry her onto an international stage. Frida Kahlo devoted the next year to preparing new works for an upcoming exhibition in New York City. By October 1938, she travelled there for her first solo show, a decisive moment in her career. She had long wished to be recognised as an artist in her own right, not only as the wife of Diego Rivera. Although she felt anxious about how her paintings would be received, she moved forward, supported by the conviction that both she and her work were ready for a larger stage. At the opening, Frida presented herself with deliberate care. She appeared in traditional Mexican clothing, adorned with jewellery and bright ribbons woven into her hair. To many observers, she seemed almost like a living extension of her own paintings, an embodiment of the culture and imagery that inspired her art. Among the pieces she exhibited was a work titled What the Water Gave Me. The painting presents her lower legs and feet in a bathtub, while a series of objects float on the surface of the water. These images refer to episodes from her life, both joyful and painful. The composition has a dreamlike quality, yet it functions as a visual inventory of memory, a way for Frida to examine the events that had shaped her existence. Other artists of the period were exploring similar territory in a style known as surrealism. Rather than depicting the visible world, surrealist painters sought to reveal dreams, fears, and the unconscious mind. Critics quickly associated Frida with this movement, noting the unusual and symbolic elements that appeared so frequently in her work. She, however, resisted strict labels. In later reflections, she emphasized that her paintings did not grow from dreams, but from the reality she experienced and interpreted. The New York exhibition became an important occasion for the city's art world. Many prominent figures attended, encountering images unlike anything they had seen before. Some viewers were unsettled and critical, uncertain of how to respond to her direct and often intense vision. Most, however, praised both the work and the woman behind it. They admired her strength of character, her distinctive way of dressing, and the originality of her artistic language. By the end of the show, roughly half of the paintings had been sold, and new commissions were requested. Frida emerged from the exhibition with a renewed sense that she was now recognized as a serious and independent artist. During her stay in New York, Frida also took time simply to observe the city. She spent hours in cafes watching people pass by and walked through different neighborhoods, absorbing the atmosphere rather than sketching or painting. Wherever she went, her traditional Mexican clothing drew attention. The public responded not only to the celebrated murals of Diego Rivera, but increasingly to Frida herself, who now commanded interest as an individual artist and personality. News of her success crossed the Atlantic. She was soon invited to exhibit in Paris, France. In January 1939, Frida sailed to Europe, this time travelling alone, as Diego was too ill to accompany her. Her experience in New York had given her confidence. She now knew that she could navigate the international art world without relying on her husband's presence or reputation. 17 of her paintings were included in an exhibition titled Mexique. The show presented her work alongside photographs of Mexico, pre-Columbian sculpture, and Mexican folk art. Frida took satisfaction in seeing her paintings placed within a broader cultural context. The exhibition allowed Parisian audiences to encounter not only her art, but also the history and traditions of Mexico that informed it. One of the works on display was The Frame, a self-portrait in which Frida appears with flowers and ribbons in her hair. She painted the image on aluminum while the surrounding frame was painted on glass and then mounted over the metal. Bright flowers and 2 birds decorate the frame, merging fine art with the aesthetics of folk tradition. The Louvre Museum purchased this painting, making it the first work by a 20th century Mexican artist to enter that renowned collection. For Frida, this was a remarkable acknowledgement from one of the world's most prestigious institutions. While in Paris, she met several leading artists of the time, including Pablo Picasso. His innovations had helped to define modern art, yet he was himself impressed by Frida's talent and by the confidence with which she maintained her own cultural identity. He admired that she chose to appear in native Mexican dress rather than adopt contemporary European fashion. He gave her a pair of hand-shaped earrings, which she later wore in a self-portrait painted 2 years afterward. He also introduced her to a Spanish song, which became one of her favourites and remained with her for the rest of her life. Despite the enthusiasm she encountered in Paris, Frida was eager to return to Mexico. When she came back to the house in San Angel, however, she found that tensions with Diego had intensified. He had been ill for several years and had produced less work while her reputation was on the rise. The shifting balance in their careers may have added strain to an already complex relationship. Eventually, Frida concluded that the only way to continue working and preserve some form of friendship was to move back into her childhood home, the Blue House in Coyoacán. By the end of 1939, Frida and Diego agreed to divorce. During this period of emotional upheaval, she painted some of her most powerful works, including Las Dos Fridas, the Two Fridas. In this painting, 2 versions of Frida sit side by side holding hands. One wears a modern white dress, the other a traditional Mexican costume. Both figures have exposed hearts, connected and vulnerable, a stark visualization of inner conflict and loss. The image is difficult to view without discomfort, yet it offers a clear window into her grief and her struggle to accept separation from Diego. Most of her paintings from this time are self-portraits. In many of them, she faces the viewer directly, her expression serious and controlled. Some compositions are simple, showing only her head and shoulders. Others are dense with symbols that hint at her thoughts, her suffering, and her resilience. In early 1940, Frida's reputation as a painter continued to grow. Her work appeared in exhibitions in San Francisco and New York, further consolidating her international standing. In September of that year, she travelled again to San Francisco, both to accompany her art and to consult her trusted physician, Dr. Leo Ilosa. A doctor in Mexico had recommended additional surgery, and Frida sought his opinion. He judged that further surgery was not necessary at that time, but admitted her to the hospital so she could rest. By chance, Diego was also in San Francisco. Dr. Rielesa encouraged him to visit Frida, and the encounter rekindled their attachment. Both had missed the companionship and artistic support they had once provided for each other. In time, they chose to marry again and to establish their home at the Blue House. Frida would work there, while Diego would use the San Angel House as his studio. They repainted the Blue House in a deep shade known as azul anil, a blue colour traditionally believed to ward off evil spirits. The choice suggested their hope for renewal and protection as they began this new chapter together. Throughout the early 1940s, Frida continued to produce striking and often unconventional paintings. Some works were straightforward self-portraits that included the parrots and monkeys she kept as pets. Others, such as Without Hope and The Little Deer, were more complex and symbolic, revealing her physical suffering and psychological endurance. She remained unafraid to expose her most private feelings on canvas, and audiences gradually became more accustomed to the intensity of her vision. In 1943, Frida was invited to teach at the School of Painting and Sculpture in Mexico City, a relatively new institution. Accepting the position was both an honour and a responsibility. She taught painting 12 times a week, an extraordinary workload that reflected her dedication to her students. They became known as Los Fridos, a testament to the close bond and influence she established as a mentor. Frida also joined the Seminario de Cultura Mexicana, a group of artists and intellectuals committed to promoting Mexican art and culture. This role provided her with another platform to present the richness of her country's traditions to a wider public, both at home and abroad. As the decade progressed, Frida's health declined. Many of her problems stemmed from injuries sustained in the bus accident years earlier. She underwent multiple operations on her spine and her right leg, enduring chronic pain and repeated periods of forced rest. To cope with these long confinements and the emotional strain they brought, she began keeping a diary, using words and images to navigate her most difficult moments. In the late 1940s, she continued to paint with determination, even as movement became more challenging. While she still produced self-portraits, she increasingly turned to still lifes, arranging fruit and other objects that could be carefully studied from a fixed position. Even these works carried emotional weight. Some of the fruit appears damaged or bruised, and many observers interpret this as a reflection of Frida's own injured body and enduring pain. Although her paintings had been shown internationally, Mexico itself had not yet hosted a solo exhibition dedicated solely to her work. That changed in April 1953, when her first solo show in her homeland opened. Her doctors advised her not to attend, judging her too ill for the strain. Frida, however, refused to be absent from such a milestone. Her bed was placed on a truck and transported to the gallery, where it was set up in the centre of the room. She arrived by ambulance and was carried on a stretcher to her bed among her paintings. The scene left a powerful impression. It was as if she had become a living centrepiece of her own artistic universe. Frida Kahlo remained strong-willed, but her body continued to weaken. On July 13, 1954, she died in the Blue House in Coyoacán, the same place where she had been born 47 years earlier. Her life, marked by pain, resilience, and extraordinary creativity, had come full circle in the house that had always been at the heart of her story.